Namaskar and welcome to this exciting new episode of Satyology Debunking Mythology. We have a great author, a personal friend, and a wonderful person in real life also. So you can visit him in Bangalore. Nitinji, you are in Bangalore?
And Mysore, just
Mysore,
near
close by.
by Bangalore.
Even more beautiful city, Mysore. Beautiful city of palaces and great weather and great food. So you already know the name. He's a very well-known author and a great researcher. It's our honor to invite him again and again for this series of shows. So without delay, let us welcome Shri Nitin Sridhar. Namaskar, Nitin
Thank
ji.
you, Aditya ji. Namaste. Happy to be here.
The same here. It's likewise. Feeling is mutual. So, Nitin ji, like we were talking about Shakti, and gradually you see in America more and more people, especially people who are into uh, feminist movement, mostly of them, many of them, they are getting new light from the feminine divinity, because India is the only place where women are celebrated as Devi and respected as gurus, and also the energy aspect is worshipped in India. No other culture across the world does that, and that is a very rare thing for many people who are actually on the path of spirituality. So in the earlier sections we did cover that Shakti, Shaktiman, Shaktivan, and also different aspects of Shakti. So today we're going to talk about Chandika based on your book and based on the Ashtakam. So before we start, what is Ashtakam for regular audience? What is Ashtakam? Usually Chandika Ashtakam.
Ashtakam basically means any verse of eight, any composition having eight verses. So we have, for example, Adi Shankaracharya's famous Ashtakam is Kala Bhairava Ashtakam. So
Correct.
it's about the Kashi's Kala Bhairava form.
Uh,
So so there we have such compositions for different deities. But the main text, as far as Chandi worship is concerned, practically is the Durga Saptashati, wherein it's also called as Chandi Path, or, where you read the part Parayana of that, and it has Saptashati, 700 verses. So it's hence it is called as 700 verses Saptashati of Durga.
yeah, it's remarkable. Bhagavad Gita also has 700 shloka. So, but they call it Gita Saptashati. They don't call it, or do they call it somewhere?
No, I don't think so. I haven't heard.
Yeah, and another aspect is the nine forms of Durga. There is a very famous temple nearby in Laguna Beach. We have Kali Mandir, very famous in North America, and that's place where all the nine forms of Durga are worshipped. Uh, coming to this Durga Saptashati, Adi Shankaracharya also create Jagannath Ashtakam. So not only Karl Bhairav Ashtakam, but also Adi Jagannath Ashtakam is written by Adi Shankaracharya. Very difficult
Mm.
Sanskrit. I mean, you cannot sing that. You have to really uh, read 20 times before you start singing it, because the Sanskrit is very high quality. So in this book, what have you emphasized in this book especially?
Yes. Uh, Basically, in the Navaratri, the Sharadaya Navaratri we do, there
Mm.
are different prathas, different practices as far as ritual worship is concerned. One is, as you just noted, worshipping the Navadurgas on each night, different forms of the Durga. But the other aspect, there are also kind of worship wherein the first 3 days, the three great goddesses, as they're called, the Mahalakshmi, Mahasaraswati, Mahakali, Mahakali, Mahalakshmi, Mahasaraswati. So these are also worshipped. There is also Upasana Krama where in these are worshipped. Basically, if you take the very the core of these worships of all of them, directly or indirectly, are connected to Durga Saptashati. Durga Saptashati is just like Ramayana. Ramayana is about the account of Rama. account of Rama and Sita and their destruction of Rama's killing and vanquishing of the enemy, the Ravana. Similarly, Durga Saptashati is actually three different charitras. Durga Saptashati is divided into three parts: Pratama Charitra, Madhyama Charitra, Uttara Charitra. And in these three different charitras, with three accounts of how Devi destroys different asuras and danavas and rakshasas. So, so this story, this account on and the destruction of the unrighteousness, destruction of adharma, of asuri shakti, is the theme of Navaratri festival itself. The Navaratri festival, which after the 9 days, the 10th day is Vijayadashami. The Vijayadashami marks this, the destruction of the evil, the destruction of the adharma, the asura shakti, the rakshasi vrittis, etc. So the whole story, the whole different accounts are there. What forms of Devi arises and how she kills different kinds of asuras in different charitras. So I come from a very Vedantic perspective. I follow Advaita Vedanta of Adi Shankaracharya. So when I read this text and I have done, this is the Upasana text. Let me make it very clear. This is a Upasana text. It is not just to read it as a story. It is to be practiced. It is a spiritual path. It is to be used in ritual. So, but when I was doing the Upasana with this text and I was reading this, so being a Vedantin, I realized that there is a deeper Vedantic message in this text as well. So my book is basically about this. That its title, full title is Chandika, the story of goddess Durga and its Vedantic import. So I try to shed light on the Vedantic aspect of the whole three accounts. What do they stand? I mean, there is a very famous saying in our tradition, in Hindu tradition, Yatha Pinde Tatha Brahmande, or the reverse, the Yatha Brahmande Tatha Pinde. Pinda means microcosm, Brahmanda means macrocosm. So what is in macrocosm is also in the microcosm. So, so this account of Devi destroying the asuras and rakshasas, it's a macrocosmic event. But there is a microcosmic equivalent of it which happens inside a sadhaka, inside a spiritual seeker, when he traverses the spiritual path towards moksha. Howsoever you define moksha, the different darshanas define moksha differently. Advaita defines in a certain way, Vishishta Advaita in a certain way. Irrespective of the definition, when you speak in a practical way, what is the spiritual path? How do we attain that goal? Though different traditions, different sampradayas approach the hill, the top of the hill in a slightly different way, there are certain common markers in this path. And this Saptashati's account, it reflects this internal journey of a spiritual sadhaka, irrespective of the path. They have to go through these certain stages, certain marks. And that is the beauty of this text, that at a macrocosmic level, it is telling the account of the Devi who slays the asuras. At the microcosmic level, this whole event actually happens inside the sadhaka itself. I need to clarify here that I am not saying that there is a Vedantic metaphor per se. It is not a metaphor. It is not. See, when we think about metaphor, often we have this feeling that the account itself is false, or the account itself is just a story. It is not so in the sense. See, first of all, reality does not is not same as history. So this is the greatest misunderstanding created in the last 300 years. The current understanding, the current definition of history traces back to perhaps I think Hegel and Kant, Hegel and other philosophers, which is just 200, 300 years ago. This is a positivistic notion of history rooted in Christian theology. the Christian theology that Jesus was a historical event, and their bifurcation and their understanding of reality as one mere history at a very human level. So this is a very recent understanding. This is not a native understanding, indigenous understanding to Hindu perspective. So this account of Devi is true, is real, but it does not mean that it is historical in the sense that it happened in a particular geography like in Mysore or Bangalore. No, it is not like that. It is not happened in a particular time, say at 1,000 years, or all such nonsensical interpretation. But what is to be understood that when I speak about Vedantic perspective or Vedantic interpretation of the Durga Saptashati, I am not saying that Devi is non-existent, the Asuras are non-existent, or the 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 slaying of the Asura is unreal. That is not so. This is a cosmic event. The divine is real. The deities are real. The devatas are real. The Devi is real. The Shakti is real. And we can do upasana to attain that Shakti. And that Shakti helps us to slay the Asura manifestations inside each of us. What are those Asura manifestations? This is called as Arishad Varga or the Ashtapashas, the Mada, Moha, Matsya, Matsarya, Kama, Krodha, and all, anger, lust, jealousy, pride, and all those things. So this and from Vedantic perspective, it's an internal event which is happening inside us, and that is what I have explained. I have in my book. I have given a Vedantic perspective, and what does the Prathama Charitra stand for from a Vedantic perspective? Second Charitra stands for. Third Charitra stands.
That's a very unique perspective, Nitinji. It's very few people attempted this. For the viewers who do not know Vedanta, because there are a lot of people who are, when you get into any scholarly debates, people quote Vedanta Sutra, which is also known as Brahma Sutra, and they quote. So, what according to you is Vedanta here?
Yes, I by Vedanta I specifically refer to the Upanishadic philosophical tradition, the Shankaracharya's Advaita Vedanta specifically, because even historically speaking, Vedanta originally referred to Shankara's Advaita Vedanta itself. The others are later branches. But basically, Vedanta, what does the term mean? Veda Anta, the end of Veda or the crown of Veda or the later portion of Veda. So, Veda, when I speak of Veda, I am not speaking merely the mantra samhitas. That is a misconception. Veda refers to the whole of it. It has four parts: the samhitas with the mantras, the brahmanas, which gives ritualistic details, the Aranyakas, which gives upasana and meditation kramas, and finally the Upanishads, which speaks about Brahma Jnana, the highest realization, and how to attain it. So the first two portions, the Samhita and the Brahmanas, are called as Karmakanda, and the last two portions, especially the Upanishads, are called as Jnanakanda, and Vedanta refers to this Upanishads, which refers to the Brahma Vidya, the ultimate knowledge. And this Upanishadic knowledge is again elaborated in Bhagavad Gita by Bhagavan Sri Krishna, and it has been again elaborated, concise way. It not elaborated; it has been expressed in a concise format using by Badarayana Veda Vyasa in his Brahma Sutras. So these three forms the Prasthanatraya, the basic texts of Vedanta. So when I refer to Vedanta, I refer to this tradition, the tradition of the Upanishad, Brahma Sutra, Bhagavad Gita, and their interpretation in the line of Advaita Vedanta of Shankaracharya. So it is from this Upanishadic perspective that I speak about this interpretation of Durga Saptashti.
For viewers who may not know, that the Sanatan Dharma is the largest repository of documentation. as compared to Sanatan Dharma, Veda, Upanishad, Puran, Itihas. It's such a large volume of literature that when the Western scholars say that, I heard very uneducated comments from big scholars. They say that it's very small or indirect, because they don't have the analytical ability. You need some intelligence, and people born in India definitely have, I can proudly claim that they have a better intelligence in many ways, because IQ, EQ, and SQ, all three are there. uh, in the Vedanta, when we say Vedanta, you correctly said it's like a formulas given to understand Veda. And just by reading Vedanta, you have to, that is for memorizing the Veda, not for, ultimately you have to refer to the four Veda, Shruti, again and again. But Vedanta Sutra is just a formula to remember. So unless you know the basic content, you cannot understand anything in Vedanta Sutra. Am I right?
Yes, yes, definitely. What Veda Vyasa has done in Brahma Sutras is basically reconciling and interpreting the vast forest of Upanishads. The Upanishads, 10 or 12 are major Upanishads, and the rest are minor Upanishads. But there are at least 108 Upanishads later recognized in Muktika canon. But even if you take only the 10, 12 major Upanishads, even then, it's a very huge corpus. Very huge. Brihadaranyaka, for example, as the name itself says, it's a Brihadaranyaka, great forest. It's a huge text. So we have the Isha Upanishad, Kena Upanishad, the shortest Upanishads are Mandukya and Isha Upanishad. And my English commentary on Isha Upanishad is coming up in hopefully in a month or two. And there are so many, it's a vast forest dealing with vast subjects. So what happens when you start studying these Upanishads, lot of doubts occur. For the mind is like a monkey. This is a illustration given by Shankaracharya. Mind is like a monkey. So it goes from one thought to another one, and then it gets confused. So what Badarayana Vedavyasa has done is to resolve some of the major doubts that could occur to a sincere seeker when he studies the Upanishads. And based on that Vedanta Sutra or the Brahma Sutra or Sharirika Sutra, on that Shankaracharya has written this commentary, Brahma Sutra Bhashya. And on his Bhashya, there are other commentaries. So this is how our tradition transmits knowledge. Explanation upon explanation upon explanation. And then there is expansion of knowledge, and then there is a concising, the contraction of knowledge. So without the Upanishads, you cannot understand Brahma Sutra. And in fact, oh, if one were to approach Vedanta from a very devotional or a very practical perspective and not necessarily a scholarly perspective, he does not need Vedanta Sutra per se. He can be only studying some Upanishads or just Gita or even the Prakarana Granthas, the secondary texts that Shankaracharya and other Acharyas have written, and then do manana and interiorization and practice. The relevance of Vedanta Sutra is when you are doing manana, the reflection upon these teachings, you get doubts. To resolve those doubts, this Vedanta Sutra is a tool. It's basically a text of logic, nyaya. It uses logic to resolve the doubts.
No, very well put it. Very well put it. Because most of the people, they, unless you are you are a follower of this tradition, and when people say Advaita, now I belong to Vishish Advaita and Dvaita, and you are Advaita, and we are happily talking because there is no conflict. If you understand it completely, there is no conflict. All paths, they are harmonious, and we are having a good conversation. And there are some people, especially I am talking about the Western academics only, they will always say that Advaita is fighting with Vishisht Advaita, Shaivites are fighting with Vaishnavas. That is all, in their mental imagination. I know they think they equate church with Vedic tradition. Vedic traditions, when knowledgeable people talk, there is always convergence in every single way. Now, especially in the case of this book that you have written, what are the finer aspects of Shakti that people should understand?
Yes, that's a wonderful question, Adityaji, and I want to highlight this. Uh, when we speak about Shakti, I mean, of course, uh, if you ask any common Indian and all, the very first thing that comes to our mind is Shakti is Devi. Devi is our mother, and we connect it in a very devotional manner. We go to temples, we worship, and she's like a mother, and we are like her children, and that is the very basis of our sadhana, our basis of our culture itself. But there is more to this Shakti than this aspect. This is the foundational aspect, but there is more to it. So, if we are to, of course, without this foundational aspect, the rest are just mere, intellectual discussion. The foundation must be there, because ultimately everything. See, you raised the point about different philosophies, different sampradayas speaking to each other, debating and all. These debates happen at a intellectual level, but the basis for that is the upasana, or the practice. And there, all the sampradayas and their own sampradaya uh, practical ways and their own goals, they're very strong, they're fundamentally strong. It may be Vedanta, Advaita, it may be Vishishta Advaita, it may be Achintya Veda. Their paths, practical paths, are very strong. They're distinct, well defined, and their philosophy also caters to that. So, coming to this question of Shakti, what my book argues, my book shows, portrays, is that how an upasana of Shakti unfolds the secrets of life, unfolds the philosophy of life, unfolds the higher realities to the sadhaka step by step, and takes him to the highest reality. You can call it as moksha, you can call it as kaivalya, nirvana, whatever you name call it, or you can call it as sayujya, union with the divine, union with your ishta, union with the shakti. In the bhakti lore, in the Puranic tradition, there are four kinds of mukti, four stages. The first stage is salokya, wherein you attain the loka of the deity, whoever deity you worship, Krishna, Devi, or whatever. In the second stage, you attain samipya, you attain nearness to the deity. And the third stage is sarupya, you become look-alike like a deity. You attain the form of the deity. There may be you can attain the form, the power, something similar to, you become similar to the deity. But then there is finally sayuja, you become one with the deity, you become one with the Brahman, because ultimately the real swarupa of all devata is that they are Brahman, the Nirguna Nirakara Brahman. So what my book shows is how a worship, a vasana of Shakti takes one stage by stage to this ultimate goal of Sayujya, ultimate goal of moksha. Even when he defined this moksha in a very Vedantic, Upanishadic sense as Brahmatmaikya Jnana. See, in the Upanishads, it gives us, if I have to put it in a very simplified manner, the ultimate goal, moksha, is defined as Atma Jnana, Brahmatma Aikya Jnana. That is, when we realize that our real self is not this body, this mind, this name, form, etc., but it is non-different from Brahman, which is the true reality. Brahman alone exists, Satchidananda Brahma. So when we realize that we are no different from Brahman, we are Brahman, and that is the highest Jnanam, that is the highest mukti. Because we self-identify with the body-mind complex, we believe that we are this limited jiva. This is due to the avidya about our own real ignorance about our own real nature. So then the Vedanta says that this is the goal, So how should we go there? It says that first one must practice dharma, dharmacharana. One should practice swadharma. That Bhagavad Gita says, swadharma nidanam shreyaha. It is better to die performing one own swadharma. So one should perform swadharma. By practice of swadharma, one gets some form of chitta shuddhi. You know, chitta shuddhi means purification of the mind. What does it purify? It purifies us from attachment, from our uh, lust, ego, anger, and all those things. And finally, and then by practice of devotion or bhakti, one completely develops vairagyam, and one becomes develops one pointed concentration. Whether you do this meditation through the yoga marga, Patanjala yoga marga, or the meditation in the form of devata upasana through this bhakti marga, that the bhakti acharyas and the Vaishnava tradition so eloquently speak about. Whatever be the path, the goal is that the practice of bhakti, one way or the other, imparts one pointed concentration upon the practitioner. So when you have the purity of the mind and the one pointed concentration, it results in certain qualities called as sadhana chatushtaya in Upanishad, in the Vedantic language. They are viveka, vairagya, etc. Viveka means discriminatory knowledge between what is real, what is unreal, what is eternal, what is temporary. Vairagya is dispassion towards worldly objects, worldly pursuits which are recognized as temporary, not permanent. And there are Shatka Sampati which are related to control of the mind, one pointed concentration, and such that. And finally, Mumukshatva, the desire for liberation. So, by practice of Swadharma, the Karma Anushtana, the Karma Yoga, and the Bhakti Yoga, together or in succession, ultimately leads one to develop these qualities of sadhana chatushtaya, which makes one qualified or competent to practice Vedanta sadhana. What is Vedanta sadhana? It is the Upanishadic sadhana, which is basically Shravana Manana Nididhyasa. Shravana means hearing, having the instructions from the Guru about the ultimate reality in the form of Mahavakya, like Tattvamasi, uh, Ekameva, Dvitiyam Brahma, Aham Brahmasmi, all these Upanishadic and Veda Upanishadic teachings from the Guru, that is, hearing of it is Shravana, reflecting upon is Mahanana, and then Nididhyasana is meditating, contemplating upon these teachings. This process ultimately results in a stage wherein there is a creation, there is a rise of Jnana Vritti, which destroys the Ajnana Vritti and facilitates one to become established in his or her own real self as Atman. So this is the Vedantic part. And I show in my book how a Upasana of Shakti helps to attain this. For example, I hope I can elaborate. I can take some more time and elaborate on just briefly on what the salient points I've highlighted. The Pratama Charitra, which is the first chapter of Durga Saptashati, the presiding deity of the chapter is Mahakali, and the demon who she kills is Madhukaitaba. You know, Madhukaitaba. That if you analyze the name, the etymology of the meaning, there the Asura's name there is Madhu Kaitaba, two Asuras, Madhu and Kaitaba. But if you analyze the etymological meaning of the name is the Madhu means honey and Kaitaba means it comes from Kita, the honeybee. It refers to honeybee. What does it imply? It refers to what is the most feature of the honeybee. It is very hard working. It spends its life collecting honey again and again and again and again. So, what does it remind of when we think about it? It reminds of human condition. All of us get up in the morning, go to office, do our job, come back, spend some time with family, go to sleep. The same cycle repeats again and again. So this is also a kind of inertia. It's kind of a materialistic inertia where we are completely immersed in our mundane life that we do not even realize that there is more to life. We do not realize that there is a higher purusharthas in life. You know, the moksha is the highest purushartha, dharma is the higher purushartha. We don't realize. We just spend our life in pursuing artha and kama continuously. So this is what these asuras of Madhu and Kaitava represent. And Devi in her form of Mahakali facilitates the slaying and the vanquishing of this Madhukaitava. What does Mahakali stand for? Kali refers to time, yes, but she also refers to Kriya Shakti. Kali is the embodiment, Mahakali is the embodiment of Kriya Shakti. So when there is tamas, the best way to get over tamas is kriya, action, that is rajas. Through rajas, you get over tamas. Tamas is not just dullness. Tamas is also this kind of inertia, this kind of attachment to mundane pursuit is also a kind of manifestation of tamas. So the only way to overcome this is kriya, using kriya shakti. What does, if I have to put it in the language of Bhagavad Gita, then it means that do not merely perform action just like that, in the pursuit of artha and kama. You perform action in the way of a karma yoga that Sri Krishna speaks about. That you perform action, understanding it as a, using your kriya shakti, perform action in a detached manner. Try to do it in a detached manner. Try to do it as a swadharma, as your duty. Try to do it in such a manner that you aim for a higher goal, not just these mundane pleasures. So this is what the Prathama Charitra embodies. So as I said, this is not merely metaphorical understanding. The practice of upasana of Mahakali, the practice of upasana of the Prathama Charitra of Durga Saptashati results in inner transformations eventually, not in a day or two, eventually, that one becomes oriented, one becomes slowly disconnected from the mundane pleasures, mundane pursuits in isolation, but one becomes oriented towards pursuit of dharma and moksha, towards higher goals. So next, after this, in the second Dvitiya Charitra, the Madhyama Charitra, what is highlighted is that the presiding deity is Mahalakshmi, and she takes many different forms to get rid of this different asuras. But the most main asura, the predominant antagonist in the Madhyama Charitra, is the Mahishasura, whom the Devi kills. So hence the name Mahishamardi. What does Mahisha stands for? And again, an etymological analysis I have done. Mahisha means bull. Sorry, not bull, buffalo. Mahisha stands for buffalo. And what is the nature of buffalo? The most two characteristics strikes us when we think about buffalo: dullness and ego, pride. And Mahishasura was an embodiment, had an excess of this. And the Mahalakshmi, who is the presiding deity of this Madhyama Charitra, running to few chapters, ensures that the Mahishasura is completely vanquished. So what is Mahalakshmi stand for? Of course, in a normal conventional sense, Lakshmi is associated with wealth. But we should know that Lakshmi is also associated with Rajas, with power, and with, importantly, Ichha Shakti, Sankalpa Shakti, the willpower. The Kriya Shakti was the Mahakali stood for is power of the action. Ichha Shakti is willpower. Sankalpa Shakti. Upasana Shakti. While the first Charitra spoke about Karma Yoga, the Karma Anushtana, Dharma Anushtana, by which we can attain the purity of mind in the Vedantic language. The second, Madhyama Charitra, refers to the Upasana, the Bhakti process, the Bhakti Yoga, the Upasana, Devata Upasana, by which we can gain control over our mind. That is what the willpower is, the power of the will, the Ichha Shakti. What does it? The mind is like a monkey. It always runs behind this and that and does this pursuit, that pursuit. So unless you control this mind, in the Upanishadic imagery, it compares a jiva to a chariot. The mind is like a horse and the senses are the horse. The mind is the rein. I don't remember exact uh, the illustration. Basically it says the mind has to be controlled. Indriya nigraha, all the senses have to be controlled, starting with the mind. So this is attained through willpower. Sankalpa Shakti, we take a sankalpa that I will not do this. From this arises, it gives power of the mind to not do that. So this is what is. So if you do the upasana of the Madhyama Charitra, this creates an internal transformation wherein you will be able to get over your dullness, get over your pride, get over the way the monkey mind acts and rein in on the mind. Indriya Nigraha. It is through devotion that you can actually completely surrender your pride. See, we all have this ahankara and all, but first in the bhakti we say that Bhagavan, I surrender all my fruits of action at your feet. So that is the first stage of giving up your sense of doership, and that happens in this bhakti process, and that is how that is what this slaying of Mahishasura by through the Mahalakshmi, who is the presiding deity, that represents. And then finally we have the Uttama Charitra, the final Charitra, wherein the presiding deity is Mahasaraswati, and there is a there is a vanquishing of many different asuras here actually, from starting from Dhumralochana and Chendamunda, who are the army commanders of their kings, who are Shumba Nishumba. Dhumralochana, for example, what does it mean? One with smoky eyes, that is one with mistaken vision. Etymologically, it means one with mistaken vision, lack of clarity. So what does Saraswati give? Saraswati refers to Gnana Shakti. There are three Shaktis of the universe. Shakti manifests in three predominant ways. Kriya Shakti, Ichha Shakti and Jnana Shakti. So we already saw that through Kriya Shakti, we do Dharma Anusthana and attain certain amount of purity of mind, Chitta Shuddhi. And then through Ichha Shakti in the Madhyama Charitra, we do practice this Upasana and attain this Ekagra Chitta Avastha, one-pointed concentration. And then now this through Jnana Shakti, for example, Dhumralochana refers to mistaken notion. What is our mistaken notion? It is that we think this world, which is completely changing day by day, as permanent, as real. This mistaken notion is changed through the power of Jnana. That is called as Vivekam in Vedanta. What is Viveka? It is a discriminatory knowledge between what is real, that is Brahman, and what is unreal, that is Jagat. That is what slaying of Dhumralochana signifies. So the worship of Mahasaraswati results in an internal transformation such that one gets Vivekam. There is a Vivekam generated inside the sadhaka. And then you have this, Chanda and Munda, right? Chanda and Munda refers to basically feelings of extreme anger. And Munda, in fact, literally means cutting off somebody's head. So why do we cut off somebody's head? It's through anger, right? So what does this signify? Again, I have done this etymological analysis. Among these sadhana chatushtaya that Vedanta speaks about, I spoke about Viveka, I spoke about Vairagya, all those have been covered. Now, in among the Shatka Sampatti that I said about control of the mind, Indriya Nigraha, there is one concept called Titaksha. Titaksha means forbearance, but it goes more than that. Shankaracharya and Viveka Chudamani define Titaksha as Sahanam Sarvadukhanam Apratikara Purvakam Chinta Vilaparahitam Satitaksha iti abhidiyate. He gives two conditions for Titaksha. He says Sahanam Sarvadukhanam, uh, forbearing of all the dukkhas, experiencing of all the undergoing through all the dukkha, the sorrow in life, apratikara purvakam, without the feeling of revengefulness, and chinta vilaparahitam, without worry. That is, whatever be the life situations, whether you have been wronged by somebody else, whether this your life is completely messed up, you go through that suffering without any feeling of revengefulness, without anger, without victimhood complex. The victimhood complex is common in today's activist circles. Without this victimhood complex, without anger, and without worry also. See, this is the second criteria is very important. Today, what happens? We do not have titaksha. The powerless do not have titaksha. Powerless endure the injustice done to them because they are weak, but they worry, they are hurt, they feel the hurt inside. Titaksha is not such enduring. Titaksha refers to the forbearing wherein one is free from dukkha. This forbearance comes from the understanding that world is temporary and we are permanent Brahman. So this titaksha wherein you completely overcome your anger, your revengefulness. And that is what this slaying of Chandamunda refers to. That once when goes very advanced in the sadhana of the Devi, Mahakali, Mahashakti, then a stage comes when one attains this titaksha, when one does not become disturbed by the happenings of the world, happenings of the life, one is completely in a calm state continuously. One becomes free of anger, free of revengefulness. That is what slaying of Chandamunda is. And then finally, towards the end of the Saptashati, it finally the Devi come. And then before Shumba Nishumba, there is of course the famous Rakshasa of Raktabija Asura. This is a very famous Rakshasa. Every Hindu knows the story. The Raktabija. You you try to beat him or kill him. If one drop of blood falls down, then many how many drops of blood falls down, that many Rakta Bijasuras clones of him arise. Rakta is blood, but Rakta also means desire. Bija means seed of desire. What is the nature of desire? No matter how many desires you fulfill, it leads to 10 times, 100 times more number of desires. There is no end to it. You keep fulfilling desire, 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 desire. There is no end to it. Today, a person wants, let me make this much of money. Let me make 1 crore rupees or dollars. Tomorrow, he attains that, then says, let me make 10 crores, 100 crores. There's no limit to desires like that. The only solution to desire is dispassion or vairagya. You realize the futility of pursuit of worldly desires and you turn away your mind from it. That is dispassion. And in the Saptashati, this is comes under the action of Jnana Shakti, that is Mahasaraswati. But in the Uttama Charitra, the actual manifestation of Devi who actually kills Raktabijasura is Kali. Kali stands for dispassion. So this is without dispassion. So this the slaying of Rakta Bija refers to this Vairagya. So we have this Vivekam, we have Titaksha, we have the all the Indriya Nigraha part, then we have this Viveka Vairagya, everything is covered. So then finally comes the slaying of Shumba and Nishumba in the Saptashati. Shumba and Nishumba, they etymologically they stand for killing. Nishumba ni prefix basically stresses Shumba. Shumba means killing. So what does this killing stand for here? In the Ishavasya Upanishad, there is a beautiful verse, verse number 3, wherein it says, Asurya namate loka andena tamasavrutaha tanaste pretya vigachanti yeke cha atmahano janaha. Atmahanaha. Those who kill their own self, atmanaha, they attain asura loka. What is this killing of the self mean? Is it speaking about suicide? No. Why would a text on Vedanta speak about suicide? Here Atmahana refers to how all of us are in a metaphorical sense killing our true self by focusing our attention away from the self and on the materialistic pursuit. We are so much identified with this body-mind complex, which is in the Vedantic language is called as Ahankara and Mamakara. What is this Ahankara, Mamakara? Ahankara means Aham, I-ness. I am this body. I am Nitin. I am this body. My name is Nitin, and I'm a chief curator of Advaita Academy. I am this. I am that. This is Ahankara. I-ness. I am this. I. As Ramana Maharshi put. And then there is mindness, mamakara. This belongs to me. I own this house. I own this car. These people are my loved ones. These people are my enemies. This is mamakara. This ahankara, through this ahankara and mamakara, one metaphorically kills the real atma, atmahana. This Shumba Nishumba stand for this. Ahankara, mamakara. So ultimately, the Jnana Shakti, the highest manifestation of Jnana Shakti, when one reaches the pinnacle of Jnana Marga, Vedanta Marga, when one completely detaches dispassionately from the worldly pursuit and completely does the nididhyasa, contemplation of the Vedantic Mahavakya, that Tattvamasi, you are that. Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman. I am that ultimate reality which is without limitation. I am not this body-mind complex. Then there is a akhandakara vritti jnana. That is, there is a vritti jnana. Jnana vritti is there. The knowledge that everything is Brahman. That knowledge vritti destroys the avidya or the ignorance because of which we identify with this body-mind complex. This destruction of false identification with body-mind complex caused due to the rising of this jnana vritti, the modification of the mind in the form of jnana. That is what this slaying of Nishumba Shumba by Devi Bhagavati Mahasaraswati stands. So when this slaying of Shumba Nishumba happens, one instantaneously attains moksha. What is moksha here? It is the being established in one's real nature. One is already Atman. Atman that is already existing. There is no attainment in a real sense that we travel from path A to path B. We are only removing the ajnanam so that we become seated in our jnanam, true state of self. So in this way, I have showed in my book basically that the path of Shakti Upasana, the path of any Upasana of any deity by extension, the Devi as the Guru, she herself leads one slowly, step by step, to the ultimate goal of moksha, ultimate Upanishad goal, ultimate Upanishad goal of Upanishad of Brahman. So this is the basically I have given a gist. The book is very small. I have this. This is the book, and it is available on Amazon, on Kindle, and everywhere. It's a very small book, short book. I think of 20-30 pages, and but it has lot of material for contemplation.
Oh, very well explained, and I think I thought you were speaking my mind, and therefore I
Thank you.
kept it going on and on. I didn't want to interrupt you. So one of the important aspects that you put out are very clear, that there is an ultimate purpose behind these Vedic literatures, and the ultimate purpose is getting out of the karma bandhana cycle. The bondage of birth, old age, disease, janma, mrityu, jara, vyadhi, and dukh doshanun darshanam, which is these are dukh and darshan, dosh darshan. So, but in the Western world, people are not even aware, and many Indians, and I'm speaking without any prejudice anyone, many of Indians have not even gone into their own literatures. So so the Western world will always politicize and criticize. Western world or Islamic scholars will criticize, but the point is that ultimately that is the truth, and the proof of the pudding is in the eating. So I'll encourage all my viewers to at least get a copy of your book, to at least start thinking in the right direction. And one of the things which also comes to mind, Upanishads were commented as Agama Shastra by different acharya. Agama Shastra is not the Shastra. Agama Shastra is a commentaries of different scholars. Yajnavalkya, everyone has written Agama. But people think of Agama Shastra as the authoritative. But if you see the Shruti which you are quoting, Shruti and Smriti which you are quoting, which is the direct truth taking from them directly. What is your view on that, sir?
Yes, I mean Shruti refers to, there are different schools and how it is understood, but basically Shruti refers to the entirety of Veda, that includes the Samhita, Brahmana, and Aranyaka and Upanishads, irrespective of the format of how these are there. For example, in the Upanishad, the usual format adopted is a conversation between a teacher and a student. But the knowledge, uh, what it is revealing, is something which cannot be understood by any other means. See, I think this is one of the fundamental lack of knowledge, lack of understanding in modern India, but more so in the West. See, the West, that the concept of Shastra Pramana or Shabda Pramana. Shruti is the ultimate Shabda Pramana. Either you take it in the Mimamsaka way that Shruti is Apaurishaya, not a human creation, and therefore it is Shabda Pramana, completely that which is completely correct, that is, which cannot have any errors in it. Or in the Nyaya perspective, that it has been created by Ishvara himself. Shruti has been revealed by Ishvara himself, therefore it is without any fault. However, you take it, the fact is what the Shruti reveals. It may be the knowledge of Dharma that it reveals in the Purva Bhaga, the earlier portions, or the knowledge of Moksha, which it reveals in the latter portions. They are absolute. And it is only by engaging with them we can, as you said, proof of the pudding is in eating it. Now, for the benefit of the lay folk, for the benefit of like people like you and me, our great acharyas, it may be Shankaracharya, Vedavyasa, it may be the later acharyas, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu or Madhvacharya or any of the acharyas you take of any sampradaya, they have all written commentaries, explanations, and various independent works based on these source texts of Shruti. And in the Dharmashastra tradition, we have again Smritis and other texts serving the same purpose. So all of these are meant to help us to understand the essence of knowledge, the essence of truth, so that we can work towards that. So ultimately, one is engaging with these texts and understanding the goal, the path, the knowledge. The second part is implementing it, doing the sadhana. Because just merely knowing that there is pudding, it it's useless to us. We have to eat it to enjoy it, right? So similarly, to ultimately attain moksha and enjoy the Brahmananda, we have to put in effort to reach the Brahmananda.
Great point you said, because ultimately, if you want to really relish it, you have to get into it. If you can't get into it, then just, Google is filled with information, YouTube is filled with information, but if you have to choose, we can provide you a little bit of information, a bit of directions, go right or left, but you have to walk the path. You either choose right or left, so I cannot tell you three-dimensional directions here because you can go either direction. But you have to choose the path yourself, and go for it, go full-fledged into it. So thank you, Nitinji. As usual, a wonderful discussion. And for the viewers who watched it live, thank you for staying this long. And for people who are going to watch it on YouTube, do comment on it. And also, the t-shirts are available, Sathology t-shirts. I'll tell you just the power of t-shirt. This is the first time I'm announcing it, Nitinji, on your show, that the power of Sathology t-shirts is that you publicly say that you follow the truth.
Wonderful. That's a wonderful thing.
So that you're publicly saying that you're against mythology. Mythology means something from your own mind, fake, imaginary. So, but here we are talking about Sathology. That means it's real, it's living. So you get your t-shirts and tell everyone what you follow and what you belong to. Namaskar and thank you very much, Nitinji.
Namaste. Thank you.